Everyone, take a look at these two pictures. On June 13th, the Chinese Communist Party's Guangming Daily published an article titled, "The Bigger the Belly, the Slower the Brain." When I saw it, I thought, isn't this some high-level trolling? Who are they talking about? If you pair it with this classic photo of Xi Baozi, then this article would be perfect. If you agree, go ahead and give it a like. Alright, let's look at a few more pictures. These were recently taken by netizens at a department store somewhere in Guangdong. A little after 5 p.m. should be the peak time for people to shop after work, but the mall is so empty it looks like a ghost town. In another post, he said that at the luxury hotel where they were staying, the staff and chefs told him they hadn't been paid for 2 or 3 months. Hello everyone, this is Chen Wei Yu, watching the world with Vivi. Although China's economic downturn is already visible to the naked eye, I was still shocked after hearing a set of data. Today, China's National Bureau of Statistics released the economic data from May, showing that the total retail sales of consumer goods in China fell by 0.6% year-on-year in May. The last time China saw a single-month negative growth in retail sales of consumer goods was back in December 2022. What was the situation back then? It was during the large-scale COVID lockdowns when the entire country was shut down and people couldn't even leave their homes. But today, with no lockdowns and no sudden external shocks, China's consumption numbers have still dropped. And behind these numbers, there is reportedly an internal economic research report compiled by the General Office of the CPC Central Committee, signed by Politburo Standing Committee member Xi and submitted directly to Xi Jinping. This document was leaked by Du Wen, a former official who now lives in Australia. Du Wen said that this internal report describes China's economy as being in the terminal stage of cancer. Du Wen stated that these reports focus on 3 main areas: investment, exports, and domestic demand, but ultimately they all point to the same core issue: employment. Do you know just how high China's unemployment rate really is? What is the actual unemployment rate among young people in China? The National Bureau of Statistics of China specifically tracks the unemployment rate for urban youth aged 16 to 24. In July 2025, the annual unemployment rate rose to 17.8%, and in August it climbed further to 18.9%. This is the highest point since the statistical methods were adjusted in 2023. It wasn't until November 2025 that the rate dropped back down to 16.9%. Officially, it's acknowledged that about 1 out of every 5 or 6 young people can't find a job. However, according to the definition used by the National Bureau of Statistics of China, for someone to be counted as unemployed, they must meet one condition. They must have actively looked for a job within the 3 months prior to the survey. In other words, if you searched for a job before those 3 months, if you've already given up looking for work, then even if you're currently unemployed, you won't be counted in the unemployment figures. And in China, there's a large group of young people who, after graduating from college, sent out tons of resumes but found they simply couldn't get a job. In the end, they had no choice but to give up and move back home, relying on their parents and becoming so-called full-time children, or just lying flat at home, or heading back to their villages to try starting a business. In reality, these people are unemployed, but they're not included in the official unemployment statistics. So if we include these people, what would the numbers look like? Zhang Dandan, an associate professor of economics at Peking University, conducted a study where she included young people who have lost the desire to look for work and have left the labor force. Her conclusion was that the actual youth unemployment rate in China could be as high as 46.5%, nearly half. Does that number shock you? Of course, some people might not agree with it, but the internal economic report from the Chinese Communist Party that Du Wen revealed also mentioned that the nationwide overall youth unemployment rate is over 20%, and in some regions it exceeds 40%. This matches very closely with Zhang Dandan's independent academic calculations. One comes from a scholar outside the system, and the other from the CCP's own internal documents. Even though they come from different paths, they reach the same conclusion. According to China's Ministry of Education, it's estimated that in 2026, the number of fresh university graduates in China will reach 12.7 million, an increase of 480,000 compared to 2025, setting a new historical record. This means that for those who are unemployed or currently job hunting, the competition will only get fiercer. At the same time, companies' recruitment needs are also decreasing. Internal reports show that recruitment demand in the human resources market has dropped by 16.8% compared to the previous year. In the past, jobs like food delivery, supermarket delivery, ride hailing, and freight services like Huala were mostly done by migrant workers coming to the city. Among those who chose these kinds of jobs, the government officially refers to them as flexibly employed workers, meaning people who work at least 1 hour a week to earn wages or business income. In 2015, the number of flexibly employed people in China was about 120 million. After 2020, it climbed to 200 million, and by 2024, it increased again to 240 million. Among the flexibly employed, the proportion of people with an associate degree or higher has also been rising year by year. Many of these people originally hoped to enter industries like IT, real estate, or finance. White-collar workers and college graduates. Due to company closures and a shrinking job market, in the end, they have no choice but to enter lower-barrier industries like food delivery, ride-hailing, DiDi, online streaming, and so on. The age requirements are also getting lower and lower. In the past, doormen were always elderly men, but now some netizens say that even for slightly upscale residential security jobs, they only want people under 30. You can imagine just how bleak the job market in China has become. With no job opportunities, domestic demand has also stalled. Without work, there's no income. Without stable income, people don't dare to spend money. If people aren't spending, of course domestic demand can't pick up. But today, China's domestic demand problem isn't just as simple as not having a job and therefore no money. It's a combination of multiple factors coming together, creating a structural deadlock. I compare them to 3 locks, all fastened at the same time. The first lock is the evaporation of wealth. Where do ordinary Chinese people keep most of their wealth? It's not in the stock market, not in mutual funds, it's in real estate. Real estate makes up 60% to 70% of the wealth of ordinary Chinese households, a proportion far higher than the 30% to 40% in the United States. And since the second half of 2021, housing prices in China have been falling continuously. By 2025, the cumulative price drop for secondhand homes in 100 cities has exceeded 8% for the whole year, according to data from the Ministry of Housing and Urban-Rural Development. Housing prices in Beijing have already fallen back to August 2016 levels. Shanghai has dropped to March 2016 levels, and Shenzhen has shrunk by nearly 40%, going straight back to the end of 2015. In many areas, prices have been slashed in half, which is truly alarming. Many families are painfully realizing that the savings they worked hard to accumulate over 20 years have suddenly shrunk dramatically overnight. If your main assets are shrinking, would you still dare to spend lavishly? The chief economist of JP Morgan China used a term called the wealth effect. When property values rise, people feel richer and are more willing to spend. But when property values shrink, the reverse wealth effect appears. People feel poorer. Even if their income hasn't changed, they'll cut back on spending. That's the first lock. Now, the second lock. Preventive savings are soaring. In the whole year of 2025, Chinese residents' new deposits increased by nearly 15 trillion yuan. Even though savings are going up, people are unwilling to spend and just want to keep their money in the bank. Why is that? Because everyone is saving money just in case. What if they lose their job? What if they get sick? What if they get old and don't have a pension? What if they can't afford their children's education? With Social Security not being sufficient, the only option is to save money themselves as a buffer. Let me tell you all a joke. Someone revealed that a person close to Xi Jinping reported to him saying that prices in all industries are continuously falling now. Xi Jinping said, "Isn't that a good thing?" This left the people around him at a loss for words because he didn't realize this is a sign of deflation. People expect prices to keep dropping, so they delay their purchases, waiting for things to get even cheaper. But the longer they wait, the more prices fall and the more reluctant they are to buy, creating a vicious cycle. This is the second lock. The third lock is the collapse of income expectations. Internal reports show that corporate hiring demand has dropped by 16.8% year on year, with even steeper declines in labor intensive industries like food service and real estate. Job opportunities are decreasing, salary growth is slowing down, and naturally, people are not optimistic about their future income. Without confidence in future earnings, they don't dare to take out loans to buy homes. If people don't buy homes, housing prices keep falling. As housing prices fall, people's wealth continues to shrink. These three locks are interconnected, forming a systemic deadlock in domestic demand. When it comes to describing the current situation of young people in China, there are a lot of new terms that you might have already heard, such as lying flat, living off one's parents, full-time sons and daughters, youth nursing homes, Kong Yiji literature, and so on. Lying flat and living off one's parents are pretty well known. As for full-time sons and daughters, we just explained it. After graduating and not being able to find a job, they stay at home, do housework for their parents, accompany them when they go out, and in exchange receive a salary from their parents. They even joke that this is much better than working a regular job. At least you won't get laid off. The term youth nursing home refers to young people who, unable to find suitable jobs and unwilling to compete in the workplace, have no expectations for the future and simply choose a low-desire lifestyle, similar to that of elderly people in retirement. They don't work, don't socialize, don't spend money, and don't pursue career success. They just want to live quietly. So, what does Kong Yiji literature mean? It refers to young people who have received higher education but find that after going to college, they can't get a job that matches their qualifications. They're not able to do intellectual work, but when it comes to manual labor, they feel like it's beneath them. They're stuck between a rock and a hard place. It's just like Kong Yiji and Lu Xun's writing, wearing a scholar's robe but living at the bottom of society, caught in this awkward situation. So these young people aren't lying flat because they want to, but because they have no choice. In other words, lying flat isn't their decision. It's something they're forced into. So why has China's economy come to this point? Over the past few decades, China's economic growth has relied heavily on labor-intensive industries, manufacturing, exports, and infrastructure. These sectors have absorbed a huge number of workers. But now, these industries are shrinking. Part of the manufacturing sector is shifting to countries like Vietnam, Mexico, and India. Duan cited internal reports saying that by 2025, about 23% of key foreign trade companies will have already set up factories overseas, and another 34% are in the process of doing so. And it's not the low-end production capacity that's moving out, but the high-end capacity. The entire technical teams and core production lines are being relocated, leaving behind only empty factories. At the same time, infrastructure investment is slowing down. There are fewer large construction sites, and jobs for migrant workers are also decreasing. Internal reports warn that the large-scale return of migrant workers to their hometowns has already led to a rebound in poverty. The increase in petitioning is adding pressure to grassroots governance and so on. You can imagine the chain reaction of problems. In order to maintain stability, the Chinese Communist Party will shackle these migrant workers returning to the countryside, trying to make their lives extremely difficult and leaving them to fend for themselves. On the other hand, the industries that the government is strongly supporting are high-tech sectors like artificial intelligence, new energy, and semiconductors. These industries require highly skilled talent, and the number of jobs they can offer is relatively limited. Moreover, the qualifications they demand don't match the academic backgrounds of most ordinary graduates at all. To sum it up in one phrase, the supply doesn't match the demand. The graduates that the market needs aren't available, and the graduates that are available aren't needed by the market. This problem can't be solved just by pushing companies to hire more people, nor can it be solved by young people simply working harder themselves. Because this is a systemic mismatch caused by the transformation of the industrial structure. So what does this mean for society? A generation of young people who have lost confidence in the future, do you think they'll want to get married? Will they want to have children? China's birth rate has been declining year after year. Young people say it's not that they don't want to have kids, it's that they're afraid to, or simply can't afford to. The employment dilemma and the fertility crisis are two sides of the same coin. So will they spend? Consumption requires confidence in the future. When a young person doesn't even know if they'll have a job tomorrow, how could they possibly spend boldly? That's why, when it comes to the issue of domestic demand, it always circles back to employment at its core. Without jobs, there's no consumption. Without consumption, of course, there's no domestic demand. And without domestic demand, there's certainly no economic recovery. At this point, some people might ask, hasn't Beijing been rolling out policies all along? Why aren't they working? Beijing has indeed been introducing policies. In the 2026 government work report, they specifically allocated 250 billion yuan in ultra long term special government bonds to support trade in subsidies for consumption and, at the same time, set up a 100 billion yuan special fund for fiscal and financial coordination to boost domestic demand. But today's numbers tell us that in May, total retail sales of consumer goods didn't go up. They actually went down, dropping to the lowest point in 3 years. Even the government's own trade-in policies gradually losing its effectiveness. So why are the effects of these policies so limited? One reason is that what needs to be addressed isn't a temporary lack of money, but long-term confidence. When the government hands out consumption vouchers or subsidies for people to buy home appliances, it might help someone buy a refrigerator, but it can't change people's expectations for the future. As long as housing prices keep falling, jobs remain unstable, and social security is still lacking, people will keep saving money just in case. The effects of short-term stimulus will fade quickly. The second reason is that the economic space for private enterprises is being squeezed. Private small and medium-sized enterprises in China have the most flexible employment. Private companies hire quickly and lay off quickly, but in recent years, the trend of the state sector advancing while the private sector retreats has become very obvious. According to data cited by Du Wen, the proportion of private investment in total investment dropped from over 70% at its peak to nearly 40% now. Private capital is either unwilling or unable to invest, and the living space for private enterprises is shrinking. The number of jobs they can offer is naturally decreasing as well. This year, foreign investment is also retreating. The number of large foreign investment projects worth over 100 million US dollars has dropped by 26.8%, and the contract amount has fallen by 46.5%. When this money leaves, it's not just capital that's taken away, but also supporting jobs and the entire industrial chain. There's also a third reason. Local governments have run out of ammunition. In the past, when China's economy faced difficulties, local governments would take on massive debt to fund infrastructure, building roads, putting up buildings, developing industrial parks to boost employment and investment. But now, the financial situation of local governments is generally very poor. Internal reports show that in 2025, the new quota for special purpose bonds will be 4.4 trillion yuan. But in reality, only about 2.35 trillion yuan is actually used for investment in construction, which is far below expectations. Many local governments are already surviving on borrowed money and simply don't have the capacity to launch large-scale infrastructure stimulus anymore. So the ultimate question arises, why doesn't Beijing implement fundamental reforms? When it comes down to it, what can truly address the domestic demand issue structurally is a comprehensive social security system. Let ordinary people no longer need to save preemptively. Let them have insurance when they get sick, security when they retire, and not have to worry about tuition when their kids go to school. Only then will people truly be able to spend freely. But for Beijing, this path comes with several political hurdles. First, massively expanding social security would require large-scale fiscal transfers. Where is this money supposed to come from? From state-owned enterprises, from the wealthy, or from local governments? Whose interests would that threaten? The Chinese Communist Party, aside from squeezing the common people, how could they possibly take money out of their own pockets to give back to society? Second, once people have adequate social security and become more independent, the Chinese Communist Party will fear that the people will demand more democracy and freedom. So keeping people hungry and poorly clothed is a tool dictators use to control the population. If Xi Jinping follows Kim Jong-un's example, then in the future, West Korea will see even more people unable to get enough to eat. Third, Xi Jinping's economic policy focuses on expanding state-owned strategic industries, not on increasing the spending power of ordinary people. So there is a fundamental conflict in how resources are allocated between these two goals. That's why you'll notice that the policies coming out of Beijing are just quick fixes, treating the symptoms, not the root cause. They'll hand out a little subsidy here, give out a bit of money there, but they never address the underlying structural problems. So what's next? Three directions are worth watching. First, stimulus. The central government provides subsidies, consumption vouchers, and bonds, investing in infrastructure and prolonging the crisis. This is the path of least resistance and lowest cost, and it's the one they're currently taking. But this road has an end because local government debt has already piled up to dangerous levels, and there's less and less fiscal room left. Alternatively, economic pressure could force reforms. When things get tough, Xi might loosen rules on private firms, attract foreign capital, and improve social security. While possible, political resistance remains strong. Xi's busy consolidating power and internal struggles. Since he lacks economic expertise, he lacks the focus for it. The third possibility is that social pressure spills over and leads to protests. Unemployed young people, migrant workers returning to their hometowns, and middle-class people holding on to devalued real estate. When the dissatisfaction of these groups builds up to a certain point, could it create even greater social pressure and trigger large-scale protests? These issues have already been flagged in internal reports. Even the General Office of the Communist Party Central Committee is using this language in their own internal documents. When the words late-stage cancer are being used to describe the Chinese economy, everyone should realize just how serious this problem has become. All right, that's all we have to share with you today. Giving a like is a virtue. Thank you all for your support, and we'll see you next time.